Hello everyone and welcome to our next React tutorial. My name is Marcin Mieszek and in this lesson I will show you how to build sticky filter buttons. We will build the app from scratch and learn how to use React hooks to manage component state and add side effects to them. You will also learn how to use styled components to build beautiful, production-ready interfaces. The buttons are similar to what you can find at wework.com website. Initially, they are located below the page header and they move together with the page content. But when we scroll down, their position gets fixed at the top of the page so that you have instant access to them all the time. Scrolling up again unstacks the buttons and they move together with the page content again. In order to create our project, we will use Create React App, a tool that creates a new React project in a single command so that we do not need to fiddle with its configuration. Everything will be set up for us. We will run it using npx, an npm package manager runner. Okay, so npx create React app and sticky buttons will be the name of our project. Let's jump into the folder with our newly created source files. So cd sticky buttons and run the app with yarn start. Perfect. Now you can see the app running in the browser. When we created the app through the Create React App tool, we got some initial components created for us. So let's explore them. When looking into a new project, I usually start with index.js, the entry point. Here we can see that the app component is rendered into DOM. So let's open app.js file and see what's inside. As we plan to work from scratch in this project, we can remove most of what is inside app.js. First, we don't really need app.css, the default style sheet created by Create React App. So I remove it. And I will also remove the corresponding file. We also don't need the spinning React logo, so I remove the import of logo.svg and the corresponding file as well. I will also remove the content of app component and leave just an empty div element. Let's pretend that we want to display workspaces in London, so I will type the London name inside div element. And you can see that it is displayed. There is one more thing that I don't like about the default structure. That is that all the components right now are placed directly under source. I will create components folder and place both app.js and app test.js inside it. I need to fix the import statement of app from index.js. So I type components/app and it works again. I also need to adjust the import inside app test.js. Let's add some basic styling to our new homepage before we jump into implementation of sticky buttons. In this project, I will use styled components for that, so let's add it to our dependencies. So yarn add styled components. Okay, done. Now I import styled components from our app.js component. So import styled from styled components. And I will wrap London with a header component. And define it just below the body of the app function. So const header is equal to styled div. This header is now an ordinary React component that we will reuse in the app. By using styled div, we denoted that we wanted to render to HTML DOM with the div tag. And what about these backticks? They are called tagged template literals in JavaScript and make it possible to add complex formatted text. For our header component, I will place CSS code inside the backticks. I will make it bigger and thicker and also add some extra space from the top. So let's start with adding font size equal to 64 pixels. Font weight, let's make it 600. And margin top 120 pixels. What is really cool about styled components is that Visual Studio Code, and probably the rest decent editors as well, recognizes the syntax inside backticks, and we added this part just like an ordinary CSS code. You can already notice some of the benefits of styled components. The header has a meaningful name, so when you scan app.js, it is easy to see what is inside. The code is not littered with class names. I really like how it looks much cleaner now. When we inspect the page with DevTools, we can see that the styling is defined as a unique class name applied to the header only, and the header itself is represented with a div element, just as we expected. But styled components are much more powerful than that. We will cover later how to write conditional styling based on our component's properties and how to extend the styling by composing components together. One last thing I want to add in this step is to center the page content and wrap it with a responsive container that makes it look good on different resolutions. I will use Tailwind for this, a lightweight CSS framework. For simplicity, I will import Tailwind CSS file directly from the index.html file. So first let's open index.html and now find the URL of Tailwind from CDN. Let's open a new tab and type Tailwind CSS CDN. And I've got the link I want to copy. So let's copy it and paste it above title inside index.html. Okay, let's now go back to app.js and wrap the header component with a responsive container. I can close the DevTools and now start with an empty div element and now apply class name container. And also I want the content to be centered, so another Tailwind class for that is mxAuto. Now, when I resize the browser, I can see that the content is placed inside a container. Let's create a basic component for our filtering button inside components. I will name the file button.js, import React from React and create it as a functional component. So const button is equal to a function that returns div element. For now, our button will just wrap its children. So I specify children as button property, export it, export default button. To use this component inside app.js, I need to import it. So import button from button. We will place some buttons below the header. First button will set number of people. Next one, the moving date. And the third button will specify some location specifics. Let's name it neighborhoods. The buttons are displayed vertically, so let's wrap them with another component to give them horizontal orientation, using styled components again. So let's define const controls as styled div component. We will use flexbox layout for that. So first we set display to flex and then flex direction to row. And I wrap all the buttons with our controls component. So let's move it to the bottom. Okay, perfect. Now let's jump to button.js and add some styling to the buttons. We start by importing styled components. So import styled from styled components. We will add styling to the div element that wraps children. Let's name it container and define it below. So const container styled div, as it was a div element, and now the backticks. Now let's add 1 pixel wide blue border. So border is 1 pixel solid blue. The buttons are confined, so let's add some internal padding and margin between them. So I start with padding. Let's make vertical padding 8 pixels and horizontal padding 16. Okay, and now I will add some margin to the right of each button, equal to, let's say, 5 pixels. I will also make the buttons round by setting border radius to 20 pixels. Border radius 20 pixels. They look much better, don't they? We will also set a dark background for the currently selected button. This will be controlled with the dark property of the button component. So let's go to app.js and mark the first button as dark. Now I will add this property to the button itself and pass it to the container. So dark is equal to dark. Let's set the background color inside container for the button. So inside template literals, we can embed JavaScript expressions using $sign and curly braces. Inside such an expression, you can place any JavaScript code. Styled components expect a function here that passes property of our container component. So props, and based on the value of boolean dark property, so props dark, we output either blue or white. Okay, this will be the value of background color. In a similar manner, let's adjust the text color. So again, color, and now I place a $sign and curly braces inside a function that takes props as its parameter, and if props dark, then color is white, otherwise it's blue. Now let's add the semicolon. In the next step, I will add a drop-down arrow at the right-hand side of each button. I will use after pseudo class for that, so you can add them directly to style components definitions as well, just like this. I will use content to display this drop-down arrow, so let's find it first. Drop-down triangle Unicode. Okay, I just copy it and paste it here. Add some margin left to give some space and make it a bit smaller. So font size 12 pixels. To make the buttons look like a clickable button, we will set a cursor pointer. So cursor pointer. Okay. In the final touch, I will add a hover effect to the buttons. To make it happen, we will use a hover pseudo selector. hover. The hover behavior differs between light and dark buttons. So light buttons just get a different background color, but for dark buttons we also want to change the border color to make it consistent. To change several properties at once, we will use CSS utility function from styled components. So first we will import it, and now let's embed a function again that takes props as its parameter. The behavior differs based on the dark property, so we will use it again. We want to output several definitions at once. This is where the CSS function comes useful. And otherwise, we output different values. So for dark buttons, background color changes, let's say, to OOC, and the same for border color, OOC, while for light buttons, background color changes to CCF. Now when I hover, this button gets a different background, and here both background color and border gets darker. Our next task is to make the buttons stack at the top position of the page when we scroll. Before that, let's add some more content to the page so that we can notice the scrolling effect. It would be nice to display some London images in the main part of the page. To make it specific, I want to display, let's say, 6 rows by 4 columns of images. Let's jump to the app.js component, and I will display the images just below the controls. I start with curly braces to indicate that I am putting a JavaScript code inside them. I want to start with a list containing 6 elements to iterate over. The way to do it in JavaScript is to create an array with 6 elements, and now get it keys iterator and spread it with triple dot spread operator. Now you can see that the numbers from 0 to 5 are displayed on our page. We want to transform each of these numbers into a content row, or, speaking in JavaScript language, map them to the rows. The map function gets each element passed one by one and applies a mapping function on it. I map our array, and inside map I define a function that takes row number, which will be a number from 0 to 5, and return some div element with this row number inside. Let's split this code into several lines to make it more readable. When we open Dev Console, we see a warning telling us that each child in a list should have a unique key property. This is for React to identify without confusion displayed elements and to know which of them should be updated if any change happens. So I define a key property on our div element, and to give it a unique value, I will just use row number. And we can see that the warning is gone, so I will close the console. Now I need to repeat this step for elements in a row. So instead of displaying a row number, I will create a new array here containing 4 elements, get its keys, and spread it just as above. I will apply map function again. This time, this map function gets a column number as a parameter. So let's write it like this. We'll display an empty div. At this point of code, we've got both call number and row number available. Let's display them. We've got all the values displayed as expected, but they are displayed in a single column. We will use Tailwind again to improve the layout. I will apply class name. I will apply flex class for our rows, which sets the display to flex. With default flex direction equal to row, it aligns the items horizontally. Tailwind provides another helper class to make each column take 25% of width. So let's go to our column div, and class name for that is W for width and 1/4 for 25%. We need to set a unique key property again. To have this key unique across all elements, I will use a hotel room numbering for simplicity. So each row will be like a floor number and column will be a room number. So it will be row number times 10 plus column number. Next thing to do is to split it into several lines to make it more readable again. Instead of the numbers here, let's display some image placeholders. So we start with image tag. We will take image placeholders from Lorem Flickr service, which is very convenient for such scenarios. So the source is https loremflickr.com. Now I specify the sizes of images and then the query phrase, which in our case is London. All the images look the same. To make them random, Lorem Flickr supports random query parameter, with each image taking a unique number. Since I already have a unique number generated here, I can reuse it and set it. To have it evaluated, I must use the string template literal again. So add a $sign and surround it with backticks. And also put it inside curly braces. This is for React to know that the value is a JavaScript expression. Nice, now we have some random and unique London images displayed. One more thing to do is to add some space between the images, and I will use Tailwind classes for that again. And the class for that is M4. Now we can scroll the page, and perhaps this margin is too big. And also we will add more rows to have the scrolling effect more visible and a bit less elements in each row. So let's make it 10 by 3. Perfect. Finally, we need to do some cleaning. When you take a look at app.js, you can see that we've got different concepts mixed here and that app children are on different levels of abstraction. Header is pretty simple, but controls exposes its implementation details, that is our buttons. But this part that displays the images is another thing. We get all the implementation details here, and I can tell you, I don't like that. When I implement React components, I want to read their code like a story with a clear top-down narrative, no subplots. Each component part should be on the same level of abstraction. With React, we can very easily improve that. First, by moving controls to their own component. I cut this code and create a controls file, controls.js, and here import React from React. Const controls is a functional component. And I export it from the file. And also I need to move controls definition here. I will rename it to container so that we don't have duplicate names. I import button directly from controls now. So import button from button. And also I need to import styled components here. So import styled from styled components. Now let's go back to app.js and I put controls here. They got automatically imported. I remove import to button. And also I need to remove the styled component name to container because it corresponds to this container here. Now let's create a content component for the main content of our website. I create a file content.js and let's create initial file structure. So import React from React const content. It will be a functional component again. I will just copy what is inside curly braces to the content.js file, export it. So export default content. Now I go back to app.js and use the file here. Our app behaves just the same as previously, which is intended for any refactoring, but the code looks much more better now. If you want to learn more about writing a clean, readable code, I highly recommend you to read Clean Code book by Robert C. Martin. Let's move to the next part and make the buttons stack at the top of the page when we scroll the browser window. We will implement the stickiness inside the controls component. And we will use React hooks for that. Hooks make it possible to add a state and perform side effects inside functional components, making the code more readable and concise, which we should always strive for. In our case, the side effect is about reacting to window scrolling event, and the state will hold information if the buttons should be stuck at the top of the page or not. Let's start with the state first. We will change the component to return the value explicitly to make place for our React hooks. So instead of returning this expression directly, we surround it with curly braces and return explicitly. We will import the hooks that we will use in this component. So we import use state and use effect from React. Use state returns a pair of values, the current state variable, which is fixed position, and a function that updates it, which is set fixed position, and it equals to use state. Use state takes initial state as its argument. In our case, when the page loads, the buttons should not be fixed at the top, so we pass false here. Please note that useState returns in fact a two-element array. We are using array decomposition to get these elements. So the names are arbitrary and it's totally up to us how the state variable and its update function will be named. Next, we will pass fixed position to the container. So fixed is equal to fixed position. Next, we will add a conditional styling to container using CSS helper function. So I import it first. And next, I embed a function that takes props as its parameter. And if props fixed, then we will output following CSS code. Position gets fixed and top property is set to 0. To check if it works, I will set initial value to true. Now you can see that the buttons get fixed at the top of the page. We'll add white background to make them look better. So background color is white. Let's see how they look like for different browser size. you can see that the buttons do not take the whole width of the page. So let's change it. Width is 100%. Let's also add some vertical padding. So padding top 10 pixels, padding bottom the same. Much better now. I will change the initial fixed position to false. In the next step, we will react to window scrolling event and we will use effect hook. Use effect takes two arguments. A callback function, so we define it inline like this, and this is where we will add a scrolling event listener. The second argument is an array with values whose change triggers the effect callback. As I want to subscribe to a window scrolling only once when the page mounts, I will pass an empty array as a second argument. Let's add a simple scroll handle now, displaying a current scroll position, and subscribe to scroll events with it. First, I will define handle scroll function as an arrow function, and this function just displays window scroll Y. We subscribe to scroll event by calling window add event listener. Event name is scroll and our handler is handle scroll. When we open console log and do some scrolling, you can see that we've got scroll Y printed. So at the top of the page it's 0. All the event listener's subscriptions should be removed when a component unmounts. Use effect offers a convenient way to do the cleanup. If it returns a function, this cleanup function will be called when needed. We return from here another function, and from this we remove event listener Okay, let's add some missing semicolons. When exactly should we make the filters stack at the top of the screen? The answer is quite easy. When we scroll the page more than the initial distance from the top of the page to the controls. To find this distance, I need to access an underlying DOM node behind these buttons, and I can do it easily with useRef, another React hook. Let's import it. Next step is to create a reference. So const controls is equal to useRef. Pass it as a ref property to our container. I want to get the initial top only once when the page mounts. Our existing useEffect hook can be used for that. Just above handle scroll, we set initial top equal to controls. I will use current property of the controls reference to get the underlying DOM node. Get bounding client rect returns the size of an element and its position relative to the viewport, that is the visible part of a browser window. The top property is what we need. Let's display the value of initial top to make sure that we retrieve it correctly. The initial top is 216, which makes sense. The last thing to do is to call setFixedPosition with information if the buttons should stick. And that happens when vertical scrolling is bigger than initial top. So we can get rid of this console log. Here we call setFixedPosition, and it should be true when window scroll Y is greater than initial top. Let's see how it works. It works pretty well, but one thing must be adjusted. When the buttons get fixed at the top of the page, the content below jumps a bit to the top. This happens because the buttons get fixed position and do not occupy the place above the images anymore. We can fix it by rendering some HTML placeholder element that has the same size as the buttons. And we should add it only when the buttons are stuck. The moment when position of buttons is set to fixed, we add another placeholder element above images. When we inspect our buttons row, we can see that their height is 62 pixels. So I will define a placeholder component, so const placeholder. It will be div component with height equal to 62 pixels. We want to render it just below container, but only when position is fixed. Fixed position and placeholder. We got an error because we can't just return two elements from a component function. In such a situation, we can use React fragments. All we need to do is to wrap all the components with empty HTML tags. We get, here is the opening tag, and here is the closing one. Let's check if the jumping effect no longer occurs. The scrolling is smooth. Well done! If you made this far, you have fully implemented a sticky header. You used React hooks, the latest addition to the React API. Use state to manage internal component state. Use effect to add a side effect and subscribe to the scrolling event. And use ref to get a direct access to the DOM node. All of this would not be possible in a functional component without hooks. You also learned how to style components with styled components library, and how to quickly build responsive layouts with Tailwind CSS framework. I encourage you now to play with the code and add some more features to it. How about displaying a drop-down when the button is pressed, and perhaps displaying the selected value near the buttons? If you want to see my solution to the above, visit marcinmieszek.com. The link is below the description, and download it from there. Thanks for watching this tutorial, and please subscribe if you like it and want to get notified about the next tutorial I am working on right now.